The tool shed offered an old discarded laundry basket that we filled with a few packing blankets, a lot of string, a hammer, pieces of rope, a rusty saw, and all sorts of other potentially useful knickknacks. Maria's mother was quick to stow away the remains of her birthday buffet into her handy knapsacks, adding a few sandwiches, 2 bottles of lemonade, and a few other things for good measure. Kai offered to carry the food, while the 3 girls of us struggled to haul the laundry basket up the steep hill. At some points it was impossible to actually carry the basket, because we needed both hands to even scale the mountains. Because of this we created the system, where 3 of us scaled a particularly steep cliff, leaving one person, usually me, behind, to tie a piece of rope around the handle of the basket before joining the others. Together we managed to pull up the basket. More than once it got stuck in a patch of grass or a particularly nosy piece of rock, and I had to climb back down to try and steer it onto a more even piece of ground. Finally we arrived at the top of the mountain, more or less unharmed, even though a little exhausted. Some of the sandwiches had slipped out of their parchment wrappings, and had gained a few blades of grass for decorations, but alas, it probably heightened their nutritional value. And the remaining chocolate marshmallows had turned into chocolate mush-textured mush. That's how squashed they were. Up here we had a breathtaking overview over what seemed like the entirety of Thuringia's forests. We had to be at least 700 meters above ground. The lone house Marie and her mother lived in was just below our feet, with a few other houses scattered in the distance. Michtel's church had turned invisible by disappearing behind the hilltop. "And what are we going to do now?" Louisa wanted to know. "Rebuild a ship," I proposed, the first thing that came to my mind, likely because the strong winds up at the top of the mountain reminded me of a storm at sea. "Amazing," said Maria. "That old sheet I put into the basket is going to make a fantastic sail." And so Kai brought all sorts of stones to make a firm outline for our soon-to-be ocean cruiser. Louise went to look for sticks long and bendable enough to make the cabin, or at least the skeleton of one, at the rear of the ship. Maria busied herself tying the sail and attaching it horizontally to a long stick, while I went around and tried to get the longest and sturdiest stick I could possibly find. After all, we needed a mast for our sail. It was more difficult than I thought it would be, because the stupid thing would simply fall back down whenever I positioned it vertically in the middle of the ship. I took a hammer and started digging a deep hole for our mast to stand in, only to hit bedrock after about 20 centimeters. "Kai, come help, you gotta hold the mast," I said. He dumped down the stone he had been holding right at the nose of the ship and hurried over to my position. I took the rope that I'd already tied to the tip of the mast and fastened them all around the ship. An array of small but sturdy sticks made my makeshift tent pegs that I used to pin the ropes to the ground, somehow actually stabilizing the mast. I'd seen my dad do it once and simply replicated it. I was surprised at how well it worked. Attaching Maria's cross mast was relatively easy in comparison. I climbed on top of Kai's shoulders, earning me the immediate complaint of, "Why am I always the one who has to carry you?" After all, during the last holidays he'd had to carry Louise as well, as the heavy coat she had been wearing all the way to the supermarket. And there was no way we could have done this before eating an entire table of candies, was there? Really, next time we do something like this, we do schedule any meals to be after I have to carry her around. Luckily, I didn't stay half as long as Louise back during our beer-buying adventure days, but instead quickly jumped off again. All that was left to do was to fasten the sail's bottom 2 tips onto the ground using my improvised tent pegs, also known as sticks, effectively finishing our mast. Kai was nearly done hauling stones to make the outline of our ship, so I set out to help Louise and Maria. They tied and braided together just enough bendable sticks to make the frame of a small cabin, just big enough to fit all 4 of us. All that was left to do was cover the whole things in a few blankets and create the coziest little cabin to crawl into. It was almost evening by now, the wind having turned an uncomfortable kind of cold. "I appreciate having a cabin," Kai said, "but at the moment I much prefer a caboose, because I don't know about you, but I'm hungry." "We still have a lot of candy and a few sandwiches," Maria noted. "That's great, but I'd much prefer an actual meal, something warm in the best-case scenario." Maria shook her head. I didn't feel like eating any more sweets either, and looked outside, hoping to find a shark or at least a salmon in our imaginary ocean, for us to catch and grill on a few spring-sun-warmed rocks. The only thing I caught was a handle basket at my very periphery, maybe 100 meters away from our ship. I was certain that it hadn't been there before. "Are you seeing that basket over there?" asked Maria. She looked in the direction I was pointing at and cheered loudly. "That's my mom's shopping basket. I bet it's filled with all sorts of tasty things." "Meat!" Kai sighed hungrily. Maria laughed. I doubt it. After all, we're still in the middle of land. If you wanted meat, we would have had to postpone my birthday until after Easter. We don't eat meat during Lent. I'm sure you won't be disappointed, though." In the meantime, Louise had already crawled out of the cabin and run towards the basket. She barely managed to lift it up, and we had to come and help her haul it back to the ship. The first thing we found was a small lantern in a box of matches. We ignited both and hung the glowing lanterns at the stick ceiling of our little cabin. Then we drew away the towel covering the rest of the basket. Said Kai. "I think I understand it now. One of the only reasons Jesus came back from the dead was because someone brought a basket like this into his cave." "Sure, yes," Louise said. "And that's the reason why we look for the Easter basket on Easter Sunday." "Oh, that's a lot of crap," said Maria, sounding a lot more unhappy than usual. "The origin of that tradition comes from the idea of looking for the dead Jesus himself. Of course I won't actually find him, but instead I'm positively surprised when I find a chocolate Easter bunny or colored Easter eggs. It's a symbol for the joyful message of Christ has risen, he has overcome the darkness of death. Though, on the other hand," she looked a bit deeper into the basket, "the contents of this are very much reawakening my formerly decayed spirit of life."